The air inside the field tent was thick with heat, dust, and the sharp sting of antiseptic. Outside, the distant pop of gunfire echoed like a grim metronome marking time. Inside, chaos moved with practiced rhythm, shouted orders, the hum of generators, and the metallic clatter of surgical tools. She moved through it all like still water. No one knew much about her. She'd arrived at the forward operating base 3 weeks ago, a transfer from another unit, no details given. Just a name on a form. Grace Halstead, field nurse, civilian contract, 10 years experience. No rank, no service record anyone could verify. But she didn't need titles. The way she handled trauma, hands steady under pressure, decisions made in silence, was enough for the others to step back and let her lead without question. Grace didn't talk unless necessary. Her uniform bore no insignia, no personal flair, not even a name tag. But she had presence, a quiet control that made even the greenest medics follow her cues without protest. She never flinched at the worst injuries, never hesitated when seconds meant the difference between life and death. She wore her hair tied tight and her glasses perched low, a clipboard always in her left hand. Calm, professional, detached. No one could tell if she was 35 or 40. No one knew if she had family. She didn't talk about back home. For all they knew, she belonged to the dust and the desert itself. But there was one thing that didn't quite fit. A faint outline of ink visible just below the collar of her scrub top, where her dog tags would have hung if she'd had any. Most assumed it was something meaningless, maybe a tattoo from her youth. No one dared ask. Until the boy came in. He wasn't a boy, not really. 28, maybe 30. Muscular, blood-soaked, his right leg shredded below the knee. His uniform was torn beyond recognition, but the patch on his chest hadn't burned away. SEAL. They called in a medevac, but it wouldn't arrive for 40 minutes. He'd be dead in 10. Grace didn't hesitate. She cleared the trauma bed, ordered epinephrine, called for suction. The younger nurses fell in without question. Her voice never rose, her hands never shook. They worked on him in silence until his hand shot up and grabbed her wrist. Everyone froze. His eyes, clouded with pain, locked on her face. Then he spoke. Just one word. Hoarse. Certain. Phoenix. The nurse at her left dropped a scalpel. Grace didn't move. She just removed her glasses and stared at him. Something in her face, something unreadable, shifted. Her jaw set, her posture straightened just slightly, like a weight she'd carried for years had suddenly returned to her shoulders. And there it was. As she leaned forward, her collar shifted and the full tattoo came into view. Not decorative, not random. A phoenix, wings outstretched, flame rising around a trident. It wasn't a civilian tattoo. It was a code. And in that instant, the illusion of anonymity shattered. The woman they'd thought they knew wasn't who they thought she was. And the man bleeding out on the table? He wasn't just a soldier. He was a witness. A witness to who Grace Halstead really was and who she'd once been trained to become. The tent had gone silent, except for the low beeping of a monitor struggling to track the SEAL's erratic pulse. But no one was looking at the machine. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on Grace Halstead. Correction. Phoenix. A name that hadn't been spoken aloud in years, at least not in places like this, under canvas roofs and flickering battery-powered lights. Her jaw clenched as the SEAL's grip loosened, his adrenaline spent. He fell back into the gurney, unconscious once more, lips parted as if he might say something else. But he didn't need to. The damage was done. The nurse who had dropped the scalpel, Mira, fresh out of stateside training, was still frozen, staring at Grace like she'd just watched someone peel off a mask mid-surgery. You know him?" she asked, voice barely audible. Grace didn't answer. Instead, she reached across the table, applied pressure to the wound with her gloved hands, and began barking orders in a voice none of them had ever heard her use. Sharper, colder, military. "Clamp, 2 units Oneg. He's going into shock. I want the bleeding slowed before his lungs fill with fluid." The others scrambled into action. It was automatic. They didn't even realize they were obeying until it was done. Something in her tone, something unmistakable, demanded compliance. Once the immediate threat was under control, Grace stepped back from the table. Her gloves were soaked to the wrists. Her face was calm, but her eyes weren't. They flicked to the others, then down to the man on the table. His dog tag had been burned off, but the second tag, tucked inside his boot, was still there. She pulled it free and turned it over. Call sign, Wraith. Unit, redacted. Branch, SEAL Team 9. Her breath hitched. Not visibly, not audibly, but something in her chest constricted, and she felt it like a ripple in still water. She knew that unit. She had served with that unit once, long before this desert hospital and the anonymity she'd built like armor. One of the older field doctors, Captain Roth, entered then, having just returned from another emergency tent. He was gruff, always too tired to care about gossip, but even he noticed the way the others were acting, how no one spoke, how every set of eyes traced the tattoo still half visible on Grace's chest as if trying to decode it. "What happened here?" Roth asked. No one answered. Grace spoke quietly. "SEAL, hemorrhaging abdominal, full limb trauma. He called me by a name no one here knows." "And what name is that?" She held his gaze. "Phoenix." Roth went still. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Then he gave the barest of nods. "I won't ask." "Good," she said. They worked in silence for another half hour. When it was over, the patient stable and transferred to critical watch, Roth followed her out to the supply tent. He waited until the flap closed behind them, then leaned in. "I was at Kandahar in '09. "I know," she replied. "You were in the satellite unit outside the wire, the one they wouldn't even let us log in the books." She said nothing. "They said Phoenix went dark in 2017, that she disappeared after a mission that got scrubbed." Grace looked at him flatly. "Didn't disappear, just got tired of watching my team die while senators rewrote our reports." Roth exhaled slowly. "Then why are you here?" "I wanted to go where no one asked questions, where saving lives didn't involve politics." He nodded once. "But it followed you anyway." She looked down at her forearm, now covered again by her sleeve. "It always does." They stood in silence for a long moment before Roth finally said, "Whatever you were before, they may need it again. SEALs don't call code names by accident, especially not while bleeding out." Grace didn't respond. She just stepped out into the fading desert light, eyes scanning the perimeter of the base. The shadows were getting longer, and her past was starting to catch up. The next morning, the med tent was quiet, but not peaceful. Grace could feel it in the air. The stillness wasn't from calm, but tension. Whispers swirled through the compound like desert dust. No one said it to her face, but she caught the glances, the small hesitations. People who'd worked beside her for weeks now hesitated before handing her gauze. Others offered unnecessary deference,
calling her ma'am like she outranked them, because maybe she did. That word, Phoenix, had cracked something open, and it wasn't going to close again. The SEAL, Wraith, was still unconscious in critical care, but his vitals were holding. A silent battle raged behind his broken body, and Grace? She found herself checking in on him every few hours, even when it wasn't her assigned rotation. She told herself it was for medical reasons. She knew better. It was late afternoon when the next shift brought in 2 men from a dust-off unit, minor shrapnel, dehydration, and one with a busted shoulder. Grace was cleaning a wound when someone new entered the medbay. Not a medic, not a soldier, not a patient. He walked with a slight limp, wore civilian fatigues, sunglasses, and a badge around his neck that simply read, Liaison. He scanned the room, then locked eyes with Grace. Halstead. She didn't flinch. It's Nurse Halstead. The man walked up and handed her a sealed envelope. You've been requested for debriefing. Midnight, green tent, Sector Echo 5. She didn't take the envelope. He smirked, still stubborn. I'm not your handler anymore. No, he admitted, but someone higher than both of us wants to know why a ghost got spotted in the middle of a triage unit. She stared at him until he left. Then, and only then, did she take the envelope and slip it into her bag. Later, while reorganizing supplies, Mira approached her. Can I ask you something? The younger nurse said carefully. Grace didn't look up. You already are. Mira hesitated. Who is Phoenix? Grace paused, holding a syringe between her fingers. She was someone who did things she doesn't talk about, and who paid the price in silence. Is she you? Grace finally looked at her. She was. Mira's eyes dropped to the edge of Grace's collar, where the faint outline of the phoenix tattoo had been visible the day before. That SEAL, he knew you, really knew you. Grace gave a slow nod. And if he remembers what I think he does, then a lot of people are going to come asking questions. Mira swallowed.
Why not just tell them who you are? Grace gave the slightest smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Because when you've been burned once, you don't invite the fire back in. That night she left her tent without fanfare. The moon above was half-veiled in dust, casting long shadows across the sandbags and satellite dishes that made up the base's skeleton. She walked toward Echo 5, toward the past, toward the reckoning. She found the green tent, unmarked but guarded. The liaison was already inside, along with 2 others, a man in Marine Command uniform and a woman in civilian clothes with intelligence eyes and a data tablet she never looked up from. Grace stepped in, back straight, hands behind her. The Marine looked up. We have a situation. SEAL Team 9 wasn't supposed to be in this region. Their presence was deniable. But now we've got a man in your unit, in critical condition, who called you out loud by a code name that's been classified since 2017. Grace said nothing. The woman with the tablet spoke next. Phoenix went dark after the Kiev operation. The report said MIA, presumed dead. Grace's tone was flat. Reports were written by people who didn't want accountability. Why come here? Why this unit? Because I thought it was far enough. The Marine leaned forward. He recognized you. That means others might, which means you're a liability. Grace's lips curled slightly. If I'm a liability, you wouldn't be wasting time talking. You'd be scrubbing records or ordering a quiet exit. No one spoke. Then the woman with the tablet finally asked, Do you still remember your field clearance protocols? Grace didn't blink. Page 14, paragraph 3. When compromised in non-combat environments, preserve life, contain information,
Eliminate exposure. And do you plan to follow them? She stared at the woman. I plan to keep that seal alive. After that, whatever you think comes next, you're welcome to try. She turned and walked out. Behind her, the three exchanged a glance. She's still Phoenix, the Marine muttered. No, the woman replied. She's something worse. What's that? She's Phoenix, with nothing left to lose. It was nearly dawn when Grace slipped back into the critical unit. The lights were low, monitors humming quietly. Most of the ward was asleep or sedated, but Wraith was awake. Barely. His face was pale, lips cracked. One arm remained strapped with IV lines and telemetry leads, but his eyes were open, scanning the ceiling like they were trying to piece together two lifetimes. Grace stepped inside without a sound, pulling a stool beside his bed. He didn't turn to look at her, but she knew he was aware. After a long silence, he spoke, voice dry as gravel. Didn't think I'd see that tattoo again. Grace didn't answer. I thought you were dead, he continued. She sat, folded her hands in her lap. I was. He turned his head slowly. Then what brought you back? Her eyes didn't move. I never left. I just stopped being seen. Wraith gave the faintest breath of a laugh, which turned quickly into a cough. I told the others, he said after recovering. They didn't believe me. Grace looked at him now. Her voice was calm, but not cold, because they weren't supposed to. He studied her face, like he was still trying to line up the woman before him with the legend that had gone dark years ago. A rumor passed among Black Ops teams, a ghost with a code name, a medic who could stop a bleed in seconds and leave no one standing when it mattered. Finally, he said, We were in Zhaozhen, 2015, blackout run. You were in the Xville bird. Grace nodded once. You pulled me out. I was under rubble. 6 dead. You shouldn't have gone back. I didn't go back for them, she said. I went back because I heard a heartbeat. Silence hung between them. He reached for the edge of his sheet, struggling slightly. She helped lift him just enough for him to breathe easier. It was automatic, muscle memory. She never looked flustered. His eyes dropped slightly to the edge of her collarbone. There it was, the Phoenix, slightly faded with time, but still unmistakable. Wings arched, flames curling, and just barely etched below, almost hidden in the ink's curves, a trident. He exhaled slowly. They made us believe you went rogue, that you cost us the operation. Grace's jaw tensed. They needed a scapegoat. And you let them? She stared at him. You saw what that operation did, what they covered up. If I stayed visible, I would have had to play along. If I vanished, they had to keep quiet. Wraith shook his head faintly. And now? Now, she said, standing, I'm just a nurse who happens to know how to stabilize a chest wound in her sleep.
He chuckled. Bull, you knew the second I came through that door who I was, what this meant. Grace said nothing. She adjusted his IV drip and checked his O2 sat like it was just another round. But then, he reached out weakly and caught her hand. Don't go back under, Phoenix. The kind of quiet you carry, it doesn't stay buried forever. She looked down at him, and for the first time in years, her voice cracked. Barely. I didn't bury it to forget. I buried it so no one else would have to carry it. Later that morning, the commanding officer of the unit received a confidential report. Subject, Halstead Grace, a.k.a. Phoenix. Status, active. Recommendation, leave in place. Monitor. Justification, field effectiveness exceeds standard metrics. Legacy clearance still intact. Psychological profile stable under duress. No further escalation unless contact re-established with remaining SEAL Team 9 units. Stamped. Classified. Observe only. And so she stayed. The others still whispered, but no one questioned her decisions now. Not when patients came in screaming and she silenced pain with a glance. Not when a shrapnel wound required hands that didn't tremble. Not when the quietest person in the room was also the only one who never blinked when blood hit the floor. One evening, Mira sat beside her during dinner. Canned beans, overcooked rice, dust blowing in under the canvas. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. Grace looked up. "Good." Mira smiled. "I think I get it now. You're not hiding. You're holding it." Grace didn't smile back, but she nodded. "Until someone needs to carry it again." The storm came in without warning. It wasn't sand or wind or weather. It was movement, noise, radio chatter snapping into life. A convoy had been hit. Multiple casualties. ETA 10 minutes. Dust off inbound. Grace was already in motion before the last transmission cut off. The others scrambled. Trauma stations were prepped, cots cleared, kits laid open like surgery manuals in a war zone. Grace tied her hair back tighter, slipped her gloves on, and pulled a tray of instruments toward the center table. Then she paused. Her eyes swept the space. Something was wrong. The energy was too panicked. Mira rushed in with a clipboard. "One of the injured. It's another SEAL." Grace's blood ran cold. "Name?" she asked. Mira shook her head.
They didn't say. Just that he's untagged but bearing SEAL gear. Hit bad, chest wound. Grace's mind narrowed into a tunnel. There were no guarantees. It might be a coincidence, but in this kind of silence, instinct speaks louder than logic. Minutes later, the tent flaps burst open. Dust, shouts, and blood followed. The first casualty came in unconscious. Second, groaning. Third. There, the third one, carried between two Marines, pale, barely breathing, and on his vest, half torn, was a patch she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. SEAL Team 9, Ghost Division. Grace's feet moved before her thoughts caught up. They laid him on the table. His chest had a deep laceration across the sternum, shrapnel, maybe a collapsed lung. His face was smeared with grime and blood, but as the medics cut away his gear, she saw it, a scar across his collarbone, one she remembered stitching up 8 years ago. She looked up at Mira. "He's crashing. I need suction, 60cc epi, and an open airway tray, now." Her voice sliced through the air like a scalpel. No one argued. As they worked, the man stirred, one eye opened, glazed but aware. He blinked at the ceiling, then turned, barely, to look at her. "Phoenix?" The word was air and blood and memory all at once. She didn't answer. Not yet. His hand moved weakly toward his pocket, then slipped back. Grace reached in, pulled out a folded scrap of cloth, military standard, blood-stained. Inside it, a photo. 3 people, all in uniform, all young. One of them was her. He croaked again. "They're not dead, not all of them." Her breath caught. She leaned in, voice low. "Who?" But he passed out, flatline. Alarm screamed. The tent snapped into war mode. "Charge paddles!" Mira shouted. Grace grabbed them herself. "Clear!" Jolt. Nothing. Again. Second jolt. Faint rhythm. Spiking. He was alive, but barely. They rushed to stabilize him, the whole room orbiting around Grace like she was gravity itself. Every call she made hit with precision. Every second counted, and none were wasted. And finally, he plateaued. Stable. For now. An hour later, she stood outside the med tent, gloves hanging from her pocket, face turned up toward the evening sky. Her chest rose and fell slowly, like she was trying to breathe through 10 years of ash.
Footsteps behind her. Wraith. His color was better. Still weak, but walking now. IV stand in tow.
"You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. She nodded. "You know what it means?" She didn't speak for a moment. "I thought they were all gone," she whispered. "That night in Al-Khazir, I left them behind." "You didn't leave," he said. "You were pulled out. You didn't get a choice." "I never went back." "You weren't supposed to." They stood in silence. Then he said, "But maybe now you're the only one left who can." She turned to him. "Why now? Why here?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Because someone wants us found. Someone wants the truth to surface. That's why they're sending ghosts." She looked down at her collarbone, the phoenix ink just barely visible under her sweat-soaked collar. "I buried Phoenix in that desert." Wraith gave a sad smile. "Then it looks like someone's digging." That night, Grace opened her old footlocker. Buried beneath layers of medgear and forgotten letters was a sealed envelope. No stamp, just a number, Op 9R17, and one line in faded black ink. "In case you're called back." The desert wind had changed. It wasn't just the sand in the air or the shift in temperature. It was something deeper, something you could feel if you stood still long enough, like the ground itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to rise that had long been buried. Grace stood at the edge of the base, outside the wire, facing east. Dawn had barely begun to stain the sky, and yet she was already fully dressed. Scrubs exchanged for a set of muted tactical fatigues, sleeves rolled up, collar lowered just enough for the tattoo on her chest to breathe in the open air. The phoenix was no longer hiding. Behind her, footsteps approached. Wraith. Still pale, still recovering, but steady now. The way soldiers get when the adrenaline outpaces the pain. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No, but I was sure when I walked away, and look how long that lasted." He studied her. "They're going to try to control this, contain it. If they realize you're activating, they'll either leash you or erase you." Grace looked out toward the hills. Her voice was flat. "Then they better be faster than me." In the command tent, a secured transmission blinked on a dusty screen. The liaison officer, the same man who delivered her envelope days before, read the contents with a clenched jaw.
Operation Echo Recall. Authorization code Phoenix 17. Priority status activated. Current status unofficial mobilization in progress. Clearance level beyond command. Interference not authorized. He leaned back in his chair, whistled under his breath. "Well," he muttered, "she just made it official." Back in the medical tent, Grace reassembled her field kit. She packed fast but meticulous. Scalpels, sealant, morphine, gauze. Not for a hospital run, for something further out, something off the map. Mira stood nearby, arms folded, watching. "They'll come looking for you. I know. What do I tell them?" Grace zipped her kit shut and turned to her. "You tell them the quiet one left. And if they ask where?" Grace's lips curled, just barely. "Tell them she heard a name in the dark and followed it." 3 hours later, a convoy left the base heading south, officially assigned to a humanitarian escort mission. Unofficially, it had one extra passenger. She didn't sit in the cab. She stood in the back, one hand gripping the frame, eyes scanning the horizon. Her expression was unreadable, but beneath her collar, the phoenix breathed again. Somewhere further east, in a half-destroyed outpost long abandoned by NATO, 2 men sat at a terminal. Their uniforms bore no insignia. Their faces were sunburnt, their hands scarred from years of shadows. One of them glanced up from a blinking screen. "She activated," he said simply. The other man nodded. So the message got through. "She's going to find them." He looked down at a weathered photo pinned to the console. 3 people, the same photo Wraith carried, the same one folded into Grace's medkit now. He whispered, "She doesn't even know that 2 of them are still alive." At sundown, Grace knelt beside a dry riverbed, laying out a folded map, scanning markers scribbled in old ink. Each symbol meant something, a voice, a signal, a memory. She touched one point near the corner of the map, a place she had sworn never to return to, the birthplace of her legend, the graveyard of her silence. She didn't flinch. She stood, strapped her kit on her back, and walked. No radio check, no chain of command, no permission, only momentum, only fire, only the weight of a name whispered by a dying man who had once followed her through hell. Phoenix wasn't coming back. She had never left. They just forgot what she looked like when the fire reignited.